Welcome to my show. I'm a guest here. Her name is Christina Cumming. Mrs. Christina, how are you doing, ma?
I'm well, Timmy. Happy to be here.
Also, I want to thank you for the time and the opportunity, Christina. Firstly, you are an author. You are also a writer and a word enthusiast. Can you please, Christina, discuss more about yourself and how you are doing currently now, Mrs. Christina?
Yes, absolutely. So that is correct. I am a self-published author, and I've just put out my first book called The Journey Back to Self. I've been a writer pretty much my whole life, since really since my teen years, and I have been writing and had a blog since my early 20s, reflecting on life, observations about life, kind of bridging everything from my inner world to what I see around me. It has been a lifelong dream to actually write a book, and so it's been really exciting to put my first one out there, and hopefully a few more to come.
Beautiful. There is nothing more interesting than one trying to actually impact the world and also the society at large. Also, the book you've written, and I'm so glad you've been doing this, actually writing the blog since your early 20s is so much inspiring. And those are the futures that you've had that actually built you to the point to actually write a book today. And also, I would like to just drive to that book, The Journey Back to Self. Can you please, Christina, discuss more on the book? And do you also plan, I know you said it, to write more books in the coming future, Mrs. Christina?
Yes, yes. So, the journey back to self is really, it's about the past about 3 years, for me. And I decided to start with this because it felt like the most manageable. So this book discusses the earliest stages of recovery from traumatic abuse. It's really centered around those who are escaping or in the early stages of recovering from cultic abuse and or narcissistic abuse. Cultic abuse typically involves narcissistic abuse, but that can appear in many different ways, not just the big group cults that we think of, but even in one-on-one relationships. So myself, having grown up in a high control religion type of situation, until I was about 18 years old, and then ending up in a whole other cultic situation when I was about 27 years old that lasted until I was 41. So 14 years of my life claimed as an adult in that situation, that I only got out of a little over 3 years ago. This book, I decided to sort of chronicle what I have learned and experienced in these past 3 years of beginning recovery from almost a lifetime of coercive control and narcissistic abuse. So, my goal in writing this was to, or the inspiration, even if you will, was to condense what I have learned in these very early stages in such a way that it would be very approachable and easy to digest and synthesize the tools and techniques I've gathered such that if it were possible, I could go back in time and hand myself this book from or some 3 years ago to sort of expedite this healing process or the beginning stages of the healing process for myself. And then that inspiration sort of grew to maybe this could help others as well. So that's kind of how the book began, and that was the intention behind it. And now that it's been fully realized, I'm just hoping to get it into the hands of people who might benefit as well from the really foundational level of beginning to emerge from one of these situations.
Definitely, it is very, very important, most especially in our time today. And I'm so glad, 14 years to be in a position in life and actually getting out of it, then bringing it to a position whereby you write about it and, using it as a tool to say, how can I get this to people to learn from it? It is so much beautiful, and anyone can learn from this. I, as the podcast host, can also learn from what you've actually experienced during the recent 14 years and also in your early 20s. Those things actually bring out a lot of futures that can actually make person to actually have the sense of acknowledgement and also make themselves understand how they can survive some kind of abusive, some kind of situations in life, and also how they can be in a position to also live a life after control. Also, I would like to drive to the point of an area when one is living an abusive or high control relationship, which is only the beginning. When one is in the beginning and is living in an abusive or high control relationship, it is uneasy as well. And what do you think are some of the early stage of healing? What do you think it really looks like? And what do you think listeners should know on how to avoid feeling like they are doing it wrong? It is Christina.
This is such a great question, Timmy, and there's so many layers to this because when we get out of these situations, typically people who have been in these sort of long-term relational trauma situations, you've internalized so much guilt and so much self-blame, and we tend to default to believing that we're wrong or we're doing things wrong all the time anyway. So I do think that that does transfer over very typically into, life outside of that situation. And I think one of the most important things, like off the bat, is to realize that there is no right or wrong, especially in your healing journey. The high control groups and situations, they do tend to be very black and white. And we become very indoctrinated into seeing the world in a very black and white perspective. And coming out of that situation, one of the first things I started to experience was all the gray. There's so much gray. There's so much in between. It's not all this or all that. And in the healing journey, everyone's journey is unique. Everyone's situation is going to be unique. Their experience will be unique. Even though we may have commonalities, you will have your own situation, your own circumstances that will impact what your healing process looks like. So I think it's really critical, step one, not to compare yourself to anyone else and where they might be on their journey, um, and then to be patient with yourself. One of this is the big scope answer is by loving yourself, being kind to yourself, and being patient with yourself. Those are some of the critical elements that will expedite the healing journey, but those are big concepts that take time to learn and practice and integrate when coming out of these situations, which is, what I learned and what I hope to address in this first book. So, being patient with yourself, learning to cease judgment of yourself and not comparing yourself are really important first steps. And uh, I want to highlight this, that we tend to think, or perhaps the people around us in the world around us might tend to think that as soon as you get out of one of these situations, life is better. Everything's golden. You're just going uphill from here. Well, the truth is, you are going uphill, but that can be a battle, and that is not necessarily easy. Things don't get easier or better right off the bat necessarily. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that and that other survivors realize that just because life might even feel harder or worse at times doesn't mean that they're doing anything wrong. Um, the When we have the time and the space to feel and experience and process what we've been going through, that can be devastating. That is not an easy process. And things might actually feel harder or worse for a time before the clouds begin to part and before the sun starts to really shine on our face. If you are going through that or you have gone through that, it's not a failure. I think that's really the thing I want to impart, is that that's really normal. And despite what people might think around you, like you should be all sunshine and rainbows now. That's just not the reality in trauma recovery. The work is just beginning when we get out, unfortunately.
I sincerely appreciate the beautiful insights, Mrs. Christina. And I love what you actually said. We are all unique. We are all unique beings with unique personalities. We have unique perspective and we also have unique experiences. Also, as we are different beings, we cannot definitely define what we've passed through with another person. We are all different and we shouldn't compare ourselves to others. And most especially, ourselves. Ourself is one of the greatest I say generation generator that we think we can actually drive. We have to drive ourselves. And what can we say about ourselves? We have to be patient. We have to be ourselves. We have to continue to be humble and continue to see how we can pass through life. Because when we are out of a situation, sometimes we just have to try our best to be patient and humble enough to try our best to process the next step and the next step and the next step. And also, despite the situation that we might be into currently, whether we're in a position whereby it's just stranded, we have been traumatic in a situation, sometimes it is not just always like that. It's just a phase of life. We just need to be patient. What you said is so beautiful. We just need to be patient to look for ways we can project ourselves and also make things more better so that we'll be in a position whereby wisdom will overcome a lot of perspective because wisdom is one of the best way and the best way we can do have a wisdom is what is by we being embracing ourselves as our unique self and also seeing ourselves with patience and also kindness as well. I do know you drive to the point of self-blame in the earlier perspective, but I would just like you to drive more because many survivors really struggle with that self-blame, to be honest with you, Mrs. Cumming, long after they've left this situation. So what do you think are also the practical step that these listeners can also take to silence that inner critic and rebuild compassion for themselves, Mrs. Christine?
Mm, that is so true. So, self-blame is definitely one of the ongoing struggles, that I still wrestle with as well, because this is a long-term ongoing process. And I'm very transparent that I am still very much in it myself. And yes, self-blame, shame, all kinds of internalized criticism. The inner critic voice tends to be very, very loud um, in the minds of survivors of this kind of abuse. And I mean, there's several steps, but the very first step is to become aware of that voice in our own minds. But to become aware of it, we have to learn to, or we have to begin to practice being still and listening to ourselves. That is something that we don't usually have time to do or get the opportunity to do when we're in one of these groups or relationships. So, learning to be still, to listen to ourselves, and to build an internal communication system within ourselves is the first practical step. From that, we begin to become aware of the thoughts and the beliefs in our own minds. Once we become aware of that critical inner voice, we can start to question it. And questioning it looks like, is this really my voice? Is this really my thought? Is this really my belief? Or does this sound like something that has been told to me? Does this voice actually sound like someone else's entirely? And more often than not, it is. It is going to be the internalized voice of someone who is in a position of authority, and usually an abusive role in our lives. We tend to take on that voice and internalize it so well that at a point we no longer distinguish it from our own organic thoughts and beliefs and feelings. So first becoming aware of that inner voice, starting to realize, I don't feel well right now. Why don't I feel well? What is going through my mind? Where is that coming from? Those questions can start to help us to um, deconstruct the inner critic. Then, as we start to realize, oh, this isn't actually me, and I'm not sure I really believe this anymore, we can begin to replace that voice with our own organic, natural voice and a voice of love. That's the hope. That's the plan. That is where true healing really begins to take place. But that is a process, and it does take a lot of practice. But becoming aware of that system running in our minds, that's going to be the first step, in my opinion.
I sincerely appreciate this insights, to be honest with you, Mrs. Christina. It always begins with we ourselves. Now, if we understand ourselves better, as you've said, when we understand ourselves better, there are a lot of things that comes out of it. When we are in that position to understand who we are and ourselves better, we will know when we are not feeling good. We will know when something is wrong somewhere. And this is when we bring the sense of awareness. When we are sitting down and something is wrong somewhere, we will be aware and we will be able to sit down and think and know what is wrong and know how we can also deal with such situation so that we'll be in a position whereby things are actually going in the right place we want it to go. Because to recover from situations sometimes it is not easy. We have to be very, very self-aware with a little things that actually comes our way. And if we can do that very well, I think we'll be in a position to be ahead in circumstances and also situations that come ahead. It shows that we're in a position whereby we are preparing for things that actually comes at large in the coming future, which could really devastate and also hurt our feelings in a very, very huge way. Also, I would like to dive to the point of where you provide a toolkit for the building life after control. From the perspective you brought in the book as well, which tools do you think you can recommend to listeners they can try to start with when they feel overwhelmed or lost, Mrs. Christina?
So Timmy, it goes back to, I think, the first step. I'll start with the big answer and then we'll go back to the beginning. Ultimately, our greatest tool is going to be rebuilding a relationship with ourselves, which has typically been lost completely, well, mostly, if not completely, along the way. To do that, to get to that end goal of having a healthy, loving relationship with ourselves, we start very, very simply by learning to be still and listen to ourselves. And that sounds maybe overly simplistic, but it is not easy for most of us at all. So that takes time and practice. And for some of us, it could start in increments as short as 30 seconds. You have to start where you are and work to the degree that you are comfortable with. Um, so starting with just learning to be still and listen, get to know, just like we were talking about with the inner voice, get to know our own hearts, our own minds, what we're feeling. That's going to be step one. Then the next point, which really builds on that, is honing our intuition. Regardless of what you identify intuition as or where you believe it comes from, I think intuition is like a low-key power player for self-protection and how we learn to identify what we need. And I think that's really important in the healing journey because if we really start to hone in on our intuition, we can not only better discern things that might be harmful or dangerous for us as we move forward, but also we begin to recognize the tools and the resources that work for us, that will help us, that are going to be essential for our journey because it's going to be different for different people. So the from learning to be still and listen to ourselves, then we begin to hone our intuition, and then we begin to do things like challenging those ideas and thoughts and voices, if you will, in our mind of the inner critic, and learning to differentiate that from our true selves, our true minds, our true voice. And over time, these are just the initial steps, but from that, we are what we're doing is we're building and we're cultivating a healthy relationship with ourselves. And the more that we do that and the stronger that becomes, the not only the better will our lives become, but the safer we become, the more safely we move through this world. And that's when the clouds really begin to part. Now, there are many other steps as we go along, once we've gotten past these really early initial stages, where we begin to um, build community with others to the degree that we are comfortable, and we can incorporate a lot of other tools like gratitude and helping others. But those do have to come later at a certain point, because the beginning of the journey, it needs to be self-centered in order to begin to cultivate that relationship with ourselves in a healthy way. Um, Another just fundamental tool is learning self-regulation techniques. Learning to connect with our breath and to use that is a really powerful tool to help ground and calm ourselves in moment to moment, whenever we're triggered or even when we're not triggered. That's those tools are going to be essential, just especially early in the beginning, as we're starting to find our feet in this process.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Christina. Listening to ourselves is one of the best way we can try our best to understand who we really are. Because when we know the person we really are, because when we see ourselves, we know this is who we are, right? But when we start to listen to what we see around us and also give the sense of one of the most important thing, validation, because it is not also everything that comes to our feelings is what we also need to check on it. We also need to try our best to know if it's actually the right decision or if it's actually also the right thing we need to do. When we listen to ourselves, we have to also know how we could be aware and also be sure enough to make sure that this thing I am actually saying, I'm actually trying my best to make sure it's also the right thing, also the right step, because we are facing a safe place of recovery. We're facing a place whereby we want to be in a position whereby we are not overwhelmed or we are not lost. We want to be in a position whereby we are standing our ground as humans. Because if we can be able to understand who we really are, know what we need to do at the right moment, it will be very easy for us to actually, be in a position, be around people, even stand right at the front of people and know how to also and also know how to undo some certain sets of situations more wisely because we understand who we really are. We know the step, we know the kind of reaction we take, and we also listen to ourselves and seek the sense of validation that we think is the next thing to do. I would just lastly want to go to the point of community because I do know you spoke about the point of it's, there are a lot of things that goes later because we are working on ourselves, we are healing ourselves. Later on, we can be talking about community but I would just like the listeners to just get a sense of the point where they think they are in the position to go to those certain stage. So what role do you think community or health connection play in healing from control or abuse? And how do you think one can also, or the survivors can also tell when a new relationship is safe or unsafe? Mrs. Christina.
Oh, that's a big question. So to answer the first part of it, I think community or connection not just can, it is a vital aspect of the healing process. Like you said, or it can come a little bit later. I should say it can, because everyone's, again, journey will be unique to them. But finding community and safe community is going to be so healing, because those of us who are coping with complex post-traumatic stress disorder or CPTSD, that is a relational trauma. Most often, that is a result of long-term traumatic abusive situations. And therefore, safe, healthy relationships can be the ultimate antidote to that, the ultimate healing balm for that. But as you implied, it can take time to learn to um, to discern what is a safe relationship or situation. And even before we get to that point, it can take time before we are ready and willing to begin to build those connections with other people again. Some people might find that they are craving that and desiring that very early, and some people might find that they are very resistant to that due to fear and trauma for quite some time. So there's a few different routes that you can take, and that's going to be unique to you. But as we begin to venture out back into the world, depending on your circumstances, it could be something as simple as putting yourself in environments where there are other people. And that might be as much sort of connection that you have the bandwidth for, or that you feel safe to do starting out. So we're talking very base level. It might be just starting to go to your neighborhood coffee shop for a little while to read a book or work on your computer. It could be going to a gym or a library, going out to places where you're just around other people so that you start to remember that you are part of this greater world around you that you might have been isolated from for a very long time. So, something that simple may be the initial first steps for some people. Having small talk with strangers in a coffee shop, for example, might be as much as you can do starting out. And I think that's totally fine, and we need to take our time to build relationships, because coming out of these situations, oftentimes we don't have a clear perspective on boundaries or what healthy relationships might look like. So we may tend towards extremism, meaning keeping people out of our world altogether,
Mm.
or we might not know what the healthy boundary is for sharing about ourselves as we start to get to know someone new. There might be a tendency to want to trauma dump or share your entire story right off the bat, which may not be the safest thing to do or the healthiest way to build a new connection. So, taking our time to navigate that, I think, is really important. And it might be just talking to your, barista at the local coffee shop, chit chatting a little bit. And the truth is, in our current society and modern day, I think finding and building connection is hard for all of us, especially post-pandemic. Learning to like have real personal interactions is something I think as a society we are missing and we're craving. And therefore, I think it's important for survivors to know we're actually really not alone in this, and learning to navigate this world and trying to find healthy connections, because it seems to be a little bit lacking across the board, survivor or not. Um, and you might have to remind me of the second part of this question to me, because the first step was a yes. I think building connection is important. It will take time. Once we have built enough of a relationship with ourselves, we're going to be in a better position to build healthy relationships with other people. Again, because of that intuition, because of having a healthier inner dialogue, we're going to naturally be able to build healthier relationships with other people.
Sincerely appreciate that. Shows that either, even in the second part of the question, which is how can survivors tell when a new relationship is safe or unsafe? It is just going back to the same perspective. We all have our unique self. And to be honest with you, Mrs. Christina, it is really difficult, most especially, to be honest with you, for women in this perspective. It is really difficult because when a person is out of a situation, one has to try their best to actually make sure they are strong enough to come out again. It is very important to actually make sure they are strong enough, because so that when they are strong enough, they will be in the position whereby they will spot the red flag very easily, and they'll be able to say no to the red flag immediately. And to take that kind of step, it means that that person has to be in a position whereby he or she has actually recovered really, really well. And that is why we all are different and we have our unique self, but we have to try our best to make sure we listen to ourselves, we look at the signs, we see the signs and we actually trust ourselves and also see the validation. We can't know everything. Despite the challenges we see from this person, it could be different. And we do not want to go back to the same pattern we've experienced in recent years. So there are a lot of things that goes right. That is why, in some perspective, some people just go to the point whereby they are being empowered, they create businesses, they become, people who are doing something in the society which is actually impactful. They are really nervous of that same pattern to not repeat itself. But we do hope that if we are strong enough and we are actually listening to ourselves, we can go out, because since the time of the pandemic, as you said, it has been really, really difficult, Mrs. Christina. And we just hope that we can continue to give the sense of kindness, community, showing compassion and love. Because if we also have people around us, they will also be the one to tell us, I think you are actually missing out on something. I think you can actually do this. And that also help as well. So we hope definitely that this social media and also this technology we have will be something we start to build something we call bridges. We start to build possibility and positivity through it in the way that we think we impact the world in the positive way. And also, Mrs. Christina, there is also a question I normally ask during the end of the show. From our forefathers, from our ancestors, there are a lot of beautiful things that do exist during our ancestral time that is missing in our time today. If there is anyone or anything you would like to bring back to our time today, Mrs. Christina, what do you think that thing would be, Mrs. Christina?
Mm. Oh, interesting question. Well, I think my answer builds on what we were just talking about, which is tribal community would be my answer to that. I think that, at least from my perspective and my experience, that's what I feel is missing in my world and really in my lifetime. There was a time when, for example, children were not raised by a single parent or just two parents. There was a whole community that worked together to raise all the children in that tribe, in that group, in that community. And there's a safety in that, I think, as well as this fundamental human need. We are social creatures. We are beings of connection and community. We all fundamentally desire that. It is part of our DNA. And there was a time that our survival depended, our very survival depended on that being a part of the tribe where everyone had a role and together we were safer and we survived that way. And interestingly enough, I do think specifically referring to cultic control and what draws us in, I think that is a huge part of it, is our desire to be a part of a group, a community that is working together towards something. And when people struggle to understand what would draw someone into one of these situations, and certainly what would make it so difficult for them to leave, they are underestimating this very primal part of our psyche that needs to be a part of a group, and that we almost feel our life depends upon the safety of that group. So having said all of that, if I could bring one thing back into our current society and culture, it would be that healthy tribal community that I think we inherently long for and miss.
Completely agree. LD tribe community is one of the most beautiful thing. We want to, we hope we get to a time whereby we see the elderly ones speaking to children, giving them stories, giving the sense of community love, learning from our elders, respecting our elders, and showing the sense of compassion and love. We do know that the tools we have now can also be something that can work on it, but there are a lot of things that we as humans need to do to actually make that happen. And building the sense of community, love, kindness, and community that could actually help us thrive. That could also actually make us say, this my brother is actually facing this. Let me see how I can see what I can do in this kind of situation. Is what we've lacked. Tribal community is something we think we hope comes back. Despite what we have now, we can also use it as a tool to actually make that happen. Also, I want to thank you for the time and the opportunity. I am so much glad you are strong again. You've come out, You've brought out something that will impact the life of others. And I'm pretty much sure you're strong enough to actually face every triumph that comes by the way. And I want to thank you for the time, the opportunity for giving us this time to have this profound discussion. Thank you so much, Mrs. Christina.
Thank you so much, Timmy. Thank you for your kind words and thanks for having me here today. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a wonderful day, Mrs. Christina. Bye bye.
Bye.